The crystal flute in Alistair Covington's hand felt as cold and dead as the rest of his life. He swirled the champagne, watching the bubbles rise and die in a frantic, fleeting celebration. Around him, the annual Covington Foundation Gala hummed with the performative charity of the city's elite. Men in tuxedos sharp enough to cut glass laughed with manufactured warmth, while women draped in jewels shimmered under the grand ballroom's chandeliers, their smiles as bright and hard as their diamonds. Alistair navigated the sea of bodies with a practiced ease that belied the hollowness within. He was the architect of this glittering spectacle, the benevolent billionaire whose name was whispered with a mixture of awe and pity, yet he felt like a ghost haunting his own party. 10 years. A full decade since the silence had descended upon his world, a silence so profound that no amount of wealth or noise could ever fill it. He was listening to the mayor drone on about urban renewal, a topic Alistair had personally invested $300 million in, when a faint tug on his trouser leg broke through his stupor. He glanced down, expecting an overeager aide, but instead found a small girl, no older than 7, staring up at him with eyes the color of a summer sky. She was immaculately clean, her blonde hair tied back in a neat ponytail, but her simple cotton dress was a stark anomaly in this ocean of silk and cashmere. Security was already moving, 2 stern-faced men in dark suits converging on their position, but Alistair raised a single, subtle hand to halt them. The girl's gaze was unwavering, a strange, solemn intensity burning within it. She held a small, slightly tattered storybook in her hands. He knelt, bringing himself to her level, the expensive fabric of his trousers creasing on the polished marble floor. The mayor's voice faded into the background hum. "Hello there," Alistair said, his own voice sounding rusty, unused for such gentle discourse. "Are you lost?" The little girl shook her head, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. She took a tiny, brave step closer, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of lavender soap. She extended a small hand, not to ask for anything, but to gently touch the back of his own. Her fingers were warm. "Mr. Covington," she said, her voice a clear, soft bell that cut through the cacophony of the gala. "I know this is going to sound strange." She paused, gathering her courage, her bright blue eyes searching his, as if looking for a piece of a puzzle only she could see. Then she delivered the words that shattered the foundations of his carefully constructed world. "Your daughter," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the string quartet, yet it thundered in his ears like a cannon blast. "Lily, she's alive." The world tilted on its axis. The champagne flute slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the floor, the sound lost in the din. But Alistair heard nothing. He only heard the echo of a name he hadn't allowed himself to speak in years, and the impossible promise that followed. The 2 security men, Mason and Grant, were instantly at his side, their professional calm masking a deep concern. "Sir, are you all right?" Mason asked, his eyes scanning the crowd, then settling on the small blonde girl who stood her ground, clutching her book. Grant was already speaking into his wrist communicator, his voice low and urgent. Alistair felt 100 pairs of eyes on him, the music faltering for a beat as the small drama unfolded at the heart of the glittering affair. The mayor had stopped speaking, his mouth slightly agape. Alistair ignored them all. He was locked in the gravitational pull of the little girl's gaze. The word alive was a bomb that had detonated in the frozen wasteland of his soul, sending shockwaves through every nerve. It was a word he had buried along with his wife, Ilara, 6 years ago. Hope was a poison, and he had spent a decade building an immunity to it. He waved Mason and Grant away again, more forcefully this time. "It's fine," he managed, his voice a ragged whisper. He looked back at the girl. "What did you say your name was?" Her chin lifted with a hint of defiance. "I didn't." But it's Pippa. Pippa, he repeated, the name feeling foreign and insignificant. Pippa, that was a very cruel thing to say. Do you know who I am? Yes, she said simply. You're Lily's daddy. The diminutive, childish term struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was what Lily had called him. Not father, not dad. Daddy. It was a word from another lifetime, a memory encased in amber. 1,000 emotions warred within him, fury at this calculated, vicious prank, a tidal wave of grief threatening to pull him under, and beneath it all, a treacherous, infinitesimal flicker of the very hope he so despised. Who would do this? Who would coach a child to deliver such a perfectly aimed, soul-destroying lie? He looked for a parent, a handler, someone in the crowd smirking at their handiwork. He saw only curiosity and concern. "Who sent you, Pippa?" he asked, his voice hardening, the gentle tone gone, replaced by the cold authority that had built an empire. "Who told you to say that to me?" Pippa's face crumpled slightly, not in fear but in disappointment, as if he were failing a test. "Nobody sent me. I came by myself. My mama doesn't know I'm here." "How did you get in?" Mason interjected, stepping forward again, his tone accusatory. "The security on this event is airtight." Pippa's eyes darted to a service corridor, partially obscured by a large floral arrangement. "The kitchen door was propped open for the caterers. I'm small." Ha ha. Alistair's mind raced. An opportunist. A grifter using her own child as bait. It was disgusting, but it made a cold, cynical kind of sense. The world was full of people who saw his tragedy as an opening. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice flat. "Money?" For the first time, Pippa looked truly hurt. Her small shoulders slumped. "No, I don't want money. I wanted to tell you. Because she talks about you." This was the part of the script he hadn't anticipated, the detail. The lie was becoming more elaborate. "She talks about me?" "In her sleep sometimes," Pippa said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She says daddy, and she talks about the swing with the yellow ropes, and the white rabbit with one button eye. His name is Barnaby." Alistair's breath hitched. It was as if the air had been stolen from his lungs. The yellow ropes. He had braided them himself, a bright, garish yellow that Lily had adored. And Barnaby. The stuffed rabbit had been her constant companion, a gift from Alara's mother. It was old, and one of its black button eyes had been replaced with a mismatched pearl one from Alara's sewing kit. These were not public details. In the chaotic aftermath of the kidnapping, the police had withheld specific identifiers to weed out the false tips and the psychic charlatans. The yellow ropes and the one-eyed rabbit were secrets known only to him, to Alara, and to the monster who had stolen their daughter from their garden on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. A cold dread, mingled with a terrifying electric current, washed over him. He felt dizzy, the opulent ballroom seeming to recede into a blurry tunnel, at the end of which was this small, serious girl. "Where?" he choked out, the word tearing from his throat. "Where is she?" Pippa looked down at her worn sneakers. "She's with my mama, at our house." Grant was at his elbow now. "Sir, we can handle this. We'll take the girl to a secure location, get the police involved." Alistair shook his head, his mind a maelstrom. The police. He had spent years, millions, on the police, on private investigators, on every lead, every crackpot theory, every whispered rumor. They had found nothing. They had given him platitudes and sympathy and, finally, a cold case file. He couldn't go through that again, the raising and dashing of hopes in a bureaucratic machine. This was different. This felt visceral, raw. He had to control it. He stood up, his knees cracking in protest. He looked at Mason. "Get the car," Bring it to the service entrance at the back. No fanfare. To Grant, he said, clear a path. Discreetly. I don't want a single reporter getting a whiff of this. And get Marcus Thorne on the phone. Tell him I have a code Lily. Tell him to meet me at the office in 1 hour. No excuses. Code Lily. It was a protocol they had established years ago, a relic from a time when he still believed she might be found. It meant drop everything. It meant a lead of the highest priority. He hadn't used it in over 8 years. He looked down at Pippa, who was watching him with an unnerving calm. He made a decision, a reckless, gut-wrenching decision that defied every logical instinct he possessed. He was going to step off the cliff. "You're coming with me," he said to her, his voice low and firm. She nodded once, as if she had expected nothing less. He took her small hand, her fingers wrapping trustingly around his. The contact was like a jolt of electricity, a phantom limb suddenly regaining sensation. As they walked, a silent phalanx of security guards parting the sea of guests before them, Alistair Covington, the man who had lost everything that mattered, felt the terrifying, agonizing, and utterly irresistible pull of hope. It was a path he knew could lead to a deeper level of hell than he had ever known, but for the first time in a decade, it was a path he was willing to walk. The ride to Covington Tower was silent. Alistair sat in the back of the armored Maybach, the buttery leather and whisper-quiet engine, a stark contrast to the tempest in his mind. Pippa sat beside him, not pressed against the opposite door like a frightened animal, but in the middle of the seat, her hands folded primly in her lap, her storybook resting beside her. She looked out the window at the glittering cityscape, her expression one of quiet curiosity. Alistair watched her reflection in the tinted glass. The rational part of his brain, the part that had built a global tech empire from a single idea, was screaming at him. This was a setup, an elaborate, cruelly designed con. The details about the swing and the rabbit could have been leaked. A disgruntled former servant, a retired detective selling secrets for drinking money. The possibilities were endless, and all of them were ugly. But the other part of him, the father, the part he had tried to starve and suffocate for 10 years, was fixated on a single, impossible thought. What if? What if, by some miracle he couldn't comprehend, she was telling the truth? He had spent the first few years after the kidnapping in a fugue state of frantic action. He had funded his own investigation, plastered Lily's face on every billboard and milk carton in the country, offered a reward so large it had attracted an army of frauds. He had chased down every lead, no matter how flimsy. He'd flown to Mexico on the word of a con man, drained a reservoir based on a psychic's vision, and spent countless hours in sterile police rooms looking at photos of recovered children. His heart cracking a little more each time a pair of hopeful eyes wasn't hers. Lily had been 6 years old. She would be 16 now. A young woman. The image was impossible to conjure. In his mind she was forever 6, with a gappy smile and scraped knees, her blonde hair always escaping its ribbons. Who was this person Pippa claimed was living with her mother? He had to know. But he had to be smart. He couldn't afford to let his heart, this withered, atrophied organ, lead him into another dead end. That's where Marcus Thorne came in. Marcus was a bulldog, a cynical, seen-it-all private investigator who had been on Alistair's payroll since the early days. He was the one who had finally, gently, told Alistair that they had exhausted every possible avenue, that it was time to accept the unacceptable. Marcus was the anchor of his reality, the man who dealt in facts, not fantasies. If anyone could cut through the fog of this situation, it was Marcus. They arrived at the tower, a sleek monolith of glass and steel that scraped the sky. The private elevator took them directly to the penthouse, which served as both his office and his home. The space was vast, minimalist, and punishingly tidy. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the city, but Alistair rarely looked at it. The apartment was more of a museum than a home, a silent testament to a life that had ended. Photos were conspicuously absent. There were no childish drawings taped to the billion-dollar refrigerator, no scuff marks on the Italian marble floors. It was the home of a man waiting for nothing. Pippa stepped out of the elevator and her eyes widened, not at the opulence, but at the scale of it. She walked to the window and pressed her hands against the glass, looking down at the river of headlights below. "It's like being in an airplane," she breathed. Alistair watched her, a strange pang in his chest. He hadn't had a child in this space for 10 years. The thought was paralyzing. "Are you hungry?" he asked, the domestic question feeling clumsy on his tongue. She turned from the window and nodded. Mama was going to make grilled cheese, but she fell asleep again. The casual way she said it, without a hint of self-pity, spoke volumes about her life. It painted a picture of neglect, of a childhood spent tiptoeing around an unreliable parent. A surge of protective anger rose in him, an emotion he hadn't felt for anyone in a long, long time. He walked to the state-of-the-art kitchen, a space his personal chef used but he rarely entered. He opened the refrigerator, its contents Spartan and organized. Bottled water, protein shakes, prepackaged salads. Not exactly child-friendly. He found a block of aged cheddar and a loaf of artisanal sourdough. It would have to do. As he buttered the bread, his hands moving with an awkward, forgotten rhythm, he could feel Pippa's eyes on him. "You have a nice house," she offered. "It's quiet," he replied, the words tasting like an admission of failure. "Is it just you here?" "Yes." "It must be lonely." He didn't answer. He focused on the pan, on the way the butter sizzled, on the cheese beginning to melt. The simple domestic act was grounding, a small anchor in the swirling storm of his thoughts. He cut the sandwich into triangles, the way Alara used to for Lily, and put it on a plate. He found a carton of orange juice in the back of the fridge and poured a glass. He set it down on the large marble island in front of Pippa, who had climbed onto one of the bar stools. She looked at the sandwich, then up at him. "Thank you." She took a small, neat bite, chewing thoughtfully. The silence stretched, filled only by the quiet hum of the building's ventilation system. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was watchful. He leaned against the counter opposite her. "Pippa, I need you to tell me everything. Who is the person you live with?" "The one you say is The one you say is Lily." Pippa swallowed her mouthful of sandwich. "Her name is Sunny." "Sunny? That's what I call her. Mama calls her that too. She has hair like the sun. Blonde hair." Lily had been blonde. The treacherous flicker of hope ignited again, hotter this time. "How old is she?" "I don't know. A teenager, I guess. She helps me with my homework sometimes. She's really smart. She reads a lot." "And she lives with you and your mother?" "Yes, in the room next to mine." "For how long?" Pippa frowned, thinking. "Always. For as long as I can remember." This didn't make sense. If this Sunny was Lily, she would have been with this woman for 10 years. Why would a kidnapper keep a child for that long? It didn't fit any profile he had ever studied. Usually it was for ransom or a quick illegal adoption. This sounded like raising her. "Tell me about the book," Alistair said, gesturing to the tattered volume on the counter. Pippa's face brightened. She pushed it towards him. It's her favorite. It's called The Girl Who Painted the Stars. Alistair picked it up. The cover was faded, the corners soft with wear. He opened it. On the inside cover, in the messy, looping cursive of a child just learning to write, was a name. Lily Covington. His heart stopped. He traced the letters with his finger. It was her book. One of hundreds she'd owned, but he remembered the title. Alara had read it to her night after night. He felt the blood drain from his face. This was real. This wasn't a leaked detail. This was a physical object, a relic from a lost world. And it was here, in his sterile penthouse, brought by a little girl who claimed the book's owner was alive. Before he could process the cataclysmic implications, the private elevator chimed, and the doors slid open to reveal Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a man who looked like he had been carved from granite and left out in the rain. His face was a road map of disappointments. His suit looked like he'd slept in it, and his eyes held the weary cynicism of a man who had seen the absolute worst of humanity and wasn't surprised by any of it. He was also the most loyal and ruthlessly competent man Alastair had ever known. His eyes took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance. Alastair, pale as a ghost, clutching a children's book. The small, unknown girl perched on a bar stool, eating a sandwich. He raised a questioning eyebrow at Alastair. "Code Lily?" Marcus said, his voice a low gravel. "After all this time? I gotta tell you, Al, this better not be about another psychic who had a dream about a water tower." Alastair slid the book across the counter towards him. "Her name is Pippa. She says Lily is alive, and she brought this." Marcus picked up the book. He opened it, saw the inscription, and his professional cynicism faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something, shock, maybe even a hint of the same dangerous hope Alastair felt, crossed his features before being suppressed. He looked from the book to Pippa, his gaze sharp and analytical. He wasn't looking at a little girl. He was looking at a source, a puzzle piece. "Okay," Marcus said, his voice all business now. He pulled another stool up to the island and sat down, leaning forward, his forearms resting on the cool marble. He looked directly at Pippa, his expression serious but not unkind. "Pippa, my name is Marcus. I'm a friend of Mr. Covington's. I need you to be very brave and answer some questions for me. Can you do that?" Pippa nodded, her sandwich forgotten. "Where do you live?" Marcus asked, his voice calm and steady. Pippa gave him an address, a street in the industrial part of the city, a place of crumbling brick warehouses and low-income housing projects. It was a world away from the gleaming towers of Alastair's life. "And you live there with your mother and this girl, Sonny?" "Yes, her name is Clara. My mama." "And what is Clara like?" Pippa hesitated, picking at a crust of bread on her plate. "She gets tired a lot. She sleeps." It was a child's gentle euphemism for something much uglier. Addiction. Depression. Marcus and Alastair exchanged a look. It was a look that communicated years of shared history and grim understanding. "And Sonny?" Marcus prompted. "What is she like?" "She's quiet. She stays in her room mostly. She draws. And she reads. She has a box. A special box she keeps under her bed." "A box?" Alastair repeated, leaning forward. "What's in it?" "Her secrets," Pippa said, her voice dropping again. "I looked once when she was out. There's a rattle, shaped like a silver bear, and a little shoe. It's pink. And a picture. It's of a lady with a beautiful smile and a man. The man is you." Alastair felt like he was going to be sick. The silver bear rattle had been a christening gift from his father, the single pink shoe. They had found its mate in the garden. And the picture. It was a candid shot Alara had taken of the two of them just weeks before Lily was taken. He was holding Lily on his shoulders, laughing. How? How could these things exist in a secret box in a run-down apartment across town? The book, Barnaby the rabbit, the swing. "Sonny told you these things?" Alastair asked, his voice strained. Pippa shook her head. "No, she doesn't talk about them. I heard her. When she's sleeping. She whispers the name, Barnaby, and she talks about the yellow ropes." Marcus held up a hand, stopping Alastair's next question. He turned back to Pippa. "Pippa, why did you come here tonight? Why tell Mr. Covington?" Pippa's gaze drifted to the window, to the endless expanse of city lights. "Because Sonny is sad. All the time. She draws pictures of the sky and birds, like she wants to fly away. And sometimes, at night, I hear her crying. I thought if her daddy knew where she was, he would come and get her, and then she wouldn't be sad anymore. The simple, childish logic of it was devastating. It was an act of pure empathy, of a child trying to fix a sadness she couldn't understand. Alistair felt a wave of shame. He had been so quick to assume malice, to suspect a scam. He had forgotten what it was like to see the world through the eyes of a child, where problems had simple solutions and kindness was a currency. Marcus stood up. All right, we have an address. We have a story. It's thin, it's crazy, but it's more than we've had in a decade. He looked at Alistair, his expression grim. So what's the play, Al? We can't go in there like a SWAT team. If this is real, the girl Sunny is a long-term captive. She's 16. She might not even know who she is. This Clara woman could be dangerous or unstable. We spook her, and she could run. Or worse. Alistair's mind was clear now. The shock was receding, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. He had spent 10 years reacting. Now he was going to act. We don't go in at all, Alistair said. Not yet. We watch. I want eyes on that building, around the clock. I want to know who Clara is. I want her history, her financials, her medical records, every parking ticket she's ever had. I want to know if she has a connection, however remote, to my life, my company, my family. And I want to see this girl, Sunny. I want a picture. I want to know her routine. I want to know everything. Marcus nodded slowly. Surveillance. That's smart. It'll take time to get the team in place without being noticed. I don't care what it takes, Alistair said, his voice laced with steel. Use whatever resources you need. I want it done yesterday. He looked at Pippa, who was now struggling to keep her eyes open, the adrenaline of her adventure wearing off. The problem of what to do with her was immediate. He couldn't send her back there. Not now. Not to a home with a neglectful, potentially criminal mother. She stays here, Alistair said, the decision forming as he spoke it. With me. Marcus raised an eyebrow again. Al, you can't just keep a kid. That's kidnapping. We'll be no better than them. I'm not kidnapping her, Alistair retorted. I'm protecting a material witness, and a child who is clearly in a neglectful home. We'll get the legalities sorted out, get my lawyers on it, find a loophole. For tonight she is safer here than anywhere else on the planet. He walked over to Pippa and gently touched her shoulder. Pippa, you look tired. I have a guest room you can use. She looked up at him, her eyes clouded with sleep. Is Sunny going to be okay? I'm going to do everything I can to make sure she is, he said, and it felt like the most profound vow he had ever made. He led her down the long, silent hallway to a guest suite that was larger than most apartments. It was decorated in muted tones of gray and white, impeccably clean and utterly sterile. It had never been used. He opened a closet and found a complimentary robe that was far too large for her. He laid it on the bed. The bathroom is through there, he said, pointing. There are new toothbrushes under the sink. Will you be all right? She nodded, crawling onto the enormous bed and looking very small against the vast expanse of the duvet. Will you read me a story? She asked, her voice small. From the book? He paused, the tattered book feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. He hadn't read a bedtime story in 3,652 days. He sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress barely dipping under his weight. He opened to the first page. The girl's name was Lyra, he began, his voice thick with emotion, and she didn't have any paints or any brushes, but she had a secret. She knew how to borrow colors from the world around her. He read the simple, beautiful story of a girl who painted the night sky, his voice growing steadier with each page. He was reading to Pippa, but in his mind, He was reading to Lily. He was bridging the silent 10-year gap, one word at a time. By the time he finished, Pippa was fast asleep, her breathing soft and even. He gently pulled the duvet over her, tucked the book beside her, and stood watching her for a long moment. This little girl, this stranger, had walked into his life and handed him a grenade disguised as a key to a door he had long believed was sealed forever. He walked back out to the living area. Marcus was on the phone, his voice a low, authoritative murmur as he set the wheels of Alistair's vast machine in motion. Alistair went to the window and looked down at the city. It didn't look the same. Before it had been a collection of lights, a network of systems he owned or influenced. Now he was looking at it with a hunter's focus. Somewhere down there, in a dingy apartment in a forgotten neighborhood, was a 16-year-old girl with blonde hair and a secret box. Somewhere down there was the answer. He felt a surge of pure, unadulterated purpose, a feeling so potent it almost brought him to his knees. The grief was still there, a cold, hard stone in his gut. But now, for the first time, it was joined by something else. Rage. A white-hot, diamond-hard rage. Someone had stolen his daughter's life, her childhood, her name. And if she was truly out there, he was going to burn the world down to get her back. The next 48 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Alistair's penthouse transformed into a high-tech command center, a stark contrast to the quiet mausoleum it had been. Marcus's team, a discreet group of former intelligence agents and law enforcement specialists, moved with quiet efficiency. Encrypted laptops and satellite phones covered the marble island where Pippa had eaten her grilled cheese. High-resolution maps of the industrial district were projected onto a wall, a single building circled in red. Alistair didn't sleep. He subsisted on black coffee and a raw, nervous energy that felt like being plugged into a power grid. He had relegated the running of his global empire to his COO with a curt, non-negotiable phone call. His entire world had contracted to focus on that single red circle on the map. Pippa, meanwhile, became an unlikely resident of this tense operational bubble. Alistair had his personal shopper, a woman named Celeste, who was usually tasked with procuring rare art or vintage watches sent out for clothes, toys, and books. Within hours, the sterile guest room was transformed into a child's haven, filled with soft stuffed animals, art supplies, and stacks of new books. Pippa seemed to accept this sudden, dramatic shift in her circumstances with a quiet equanimity that Alistair found both astonishing and heartbreaking. She seemed to understand on some intuitive level that she was in a safe place, a concept that was likely foreign to her. She would spend hours coloring at a small table they had set up for her, occasionally bringing her creations to Alistair to show him. They were vibrant, hopeful drawings of suns and flowers and smiling animals. He would look at them, his heart aching with a complex mix of gratitude and guilt. He was using this child. She was his link, his key, but she was also just a little girl who deserved to be drawing pictures, not serving as a linchpin in a high-stakes investigation. He found himself softening in her presence. He would stop his intense discussions with Marcus to answer a question about what color a unicorn's horn should be. He learned she liked her hot chocolate with extra marshmallows and that she was afraid of spiders. These small, mundane details of her existence were like tiny shoots of green grass pushing up through the concrete of his grief. He was connecting with a child again, and while it was terrifying, it also felt like coming home. On the second day, Marcus called him over to a monitor. "We've got something," he said, his voice low. "Van just got into position across the street. We have a live feed of the front of the building." The image on the screen was grainy, shot from a long distance. It showed the crumbling facade of a 4-story brick apartment building. A few windows were boarded up. Graffiti snaked across the lower walls. It was the picture of urban decay. Alistair stared at the screen, his hands clenched into fists. His daughter, his Lily, could be behind one of those grimy windows. The thought was a physical torment. They watched for hours. The residents of the building came and went, a tired-looking mother with a stroller, a group of young men in hoodies, an elderly man walking a small dog. There was no sign of Clara or the girl called Sunny. Facial recognition is running on everyone who enters or leaves, Marcus explained. We're building a profile of the entire building's ecosystem. So far, nothing on Clara. She's likely using an alias. As dusk began to settle over the city, a woman emerged from the front door. She matched Pippa's vague description of her mother. She was thin, her movements jerky and uncertain. Her hair was a matted, unkempt brown, and she wore stained sweatpants and a faded hoodie. She clutched a worn-out purse and scurried down the street, her head down. "That's our Clara. I'd bet my pension on it," Marcus murmured. "Let's see where she goes." They tracked her via a street-level operative who followed her on foot from a safe distance. She went 2 blocks to a seedy-looking liquor store and emerged a few minutes later with a brown paper bag. She went straight back to the apartment. "So she's a drinker," Alistair said, the disgust in his voice palpable. "Huh, or something else that comes in a bottle," Marcus replied grimly. "Either way, it fits the picture of neglect Pippa painted." They waited. The sun went down, and the lights in the apartment windows began to blink on. Alistair's eyes were burning from staring at the screen. He felt a small hand slip into his. He looked down to see Pippa standing beside him, her face serious. "You're looking for Sunny," she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded, unable to speak. "She comes out at night sometimes," Pippa offered, "when Mama is asleep. She goes to the roof." Marcus's head snapped up. "The roof? Is there roof access?" One of the tech specialists typed furiously on his keyboard, pulling up architectural blueprints of the building. "Yes, a single access door opens from the top-floor hallway." "Get a drone," Alistair commanded. "A small one, silent. I want eyes on that roof." An hour later, a tiny, insect-like drone was hovering silently in the night sky, its high-definition camera focused on the flat, tar-papered roof of the building. The roof was cluttered with vents and old satellite dishes. And then, a metal door creaked open. A figure emerged, cloaked in the shadows and the orange glow of the city's light pollution. Alistair's breath caught in his throat. It was a girl. She looked tall and slender, dressed in dark, baggy clothes, a hoodie pulled up over her head. She walked to the edge of the roof, to the low parapet wall, and sat down, her legs dangling over the 4-story drop. "Get closer," Alistair whispered, his voice hoarse. "Zoom in." The drone moved imperceptibly closer, the camera's focus tightening on the girl's face as she finally pushed back her hood and looked up at the sky. A cascade of blonde hair, so pale it looked almost white in the drone's night vision, fell around her shoulders. Her face was thin, ethereal, with high cheekbones and a delicate jawline. She was beautiful, and she was the spitting image of Alara. Alistair stumbled back, his hand flying to his mouth as a strangled sob escaped him. It was her. It was Lily. Puh! The years fell away, the features matured, the childish roundness gone, but the shape of her eyes, the curve of her mouth, the way she held her head. It was Alara, reborn. He felt Marcus's steadying hand on his shoulder. "Deep breaths, Al," Marcus said, his voice firm but gentle. "We don't know for sure." But Alistair knew. In the deepest, most primal part of his being, he knew. He was looking at his daughter. He watched, mesmerized, as she pulled a sketchbook and a pencil from her pocket and began to draw. her eyes fixed on the sliver of moon visible between the taller buildings. She was so calm, so self-contained, seemingly oblivious to the dangerous world around her. She was also perched precariously on the edge of a roof, a detail that sent a spear of pure terror through Alistair's heart. He wanted to scream at her to get down, to pull her back, to wrap her in his arms and never let her go. He watched her for nearly an hour, his heart aching with a decade's worth of unfelt love and terror. This was his child. His little girl had grown up in a place like this, with a woman like Clara, finding solace on a dangerous, dirty rooftop. The injustice of it was a physical poison in his veins. Finally, she stood up, stretched, and slipped back through the roof access door, disappearing from view. The drone's camera feed was now just an empty roof. Alistair felt her absence like a fresh wound. "It's her," he said, his voice shaking but filled with an absolute conviction. "It's Lily." Marcus was silent for a long moment, his eyes still on the screen. "The resemblance to your late wife is undeniable," he conceded, the closest he would ever come to admitting an emotional truth. "But we still have to play this smart, Al. This changes everything, but it also changes nothing about the strategy. We need to know what we're walking into." "I want her out of there, Marcus," Alistair said, turning to face him, his eyes blazing. "I want her out of there now." "And do what? Kick down the door? What do you think that will do to a 16-year-old girl who has been a captive her entire memorable life? Her world, as twisted as it is in that apartment. Clara might be the only mother she's ever known. You are a stranger to her, Alistair, a ghost from a storybook. You charge in there, you could shatter her." Marcus was right. The cold, hard logic of his words pierced through Alistair's emotional haze. He couldn't think of her as Lily, the 6-year-old he had lost. He had to think of her as Sunny, the 16-year-old survivor she had become. Her psychological state was a complete unknown. He had to proceed with the delicacy of a bomb disposal expert. "So what do we do?" Alistair asked, the rage and impatience warring with a newfound fear of doing the wrong thing. "We keep watching," Marcus said. "We learn her routine. We find a way to make contact, a soft contact. No alarms, no drama. We need to get a sense of her state of mind, what she knows, what she believes about her life." "And Clara?" "My team is running her face through every database we have access to. We're scrubbing her financials, looking for any large unexplained deposits from 10 years ago. We're looking for a connection. She has a name, a history. We'll find it. And when we do, we'll have the leverage we need to dismantle this brick by brick without blowing it all up." The next few days were the most agonizing of Alistair's life. He was a man of action, a man who bent the world to his will. To be forced to sit and wait, to simply watch from a distance as his daughter lived her truncated life, was a unique form of torture. The surveillance was constant. They learned that Sunny rarely left the apartment. During the day, she was invisible. Her only excursions were her late-night trips to the roof, which became a ritual he both anticipated and dreaded. He saw her in the rain, huddled under a small overhang, still sketching. He saw her on clear nights, lying on her back, just staring at the stars. He began to feel like he knew her, this silent, solitary girl. He saw the artist soul of her mother in her, the quiet strength, the introspective nature. Marcus's team, in the meantime, was making progress. Clara's real name was Clara Bellwether. She had no criminal record. 30 years ago, she had worked as a pediatric nurse at the very hospital where Lily was born. The connection sent a chill down Alistair's spine. She had been fired for minor drug offenses, stealing painkillers from a dispensary. After that, her life had unraveled. A string of low-wage jobs, a history of evictions, and a deep dive into poverty and addiction. There were no large deposits in her accounts 10 years ago. If she had received a ransom, she had hidden it well or burned through it long ago. The profile they were building was not of a master criminal, but of a desperate, broken woman. On the 5th day, something changed. The drone feed showed Sunny on the roof, but she wasn't sketching. She was pacing, her movements agitated. She kept looking down at the street below. "What's going on?" Alistair asked, his anxiety rising. Something spooked her. "Clara hasn't left the apartment all day," Marcus reported, reading from a monitor. "No visitors either." They watched as Sunny suddenly climbed onto the parapet wall, balancing on the narrow ledge. She wasn't looking down as if to jump. She was looking out, towards the glittering skyline of the downtown core, towards Covington Tower. She was looking for him. Alistair's blood ran cold. "She knows," he breathed. "Somehow she knows we're watching." Marcus was already issuing orders. "Pull the drone back, wider angle. I don't want her to spot it." But it was too late. The girl's head snapped up, her eyes seeming to stare directly into the drone's camera lens, a look of fierce, hunted intelligence on her face. Then she did something that made Alistair's heart stop. She raised her hand and very deliberately, very clearly, traced 3 letters in the air. SOS. It was a cry for help, a message in a bottle thrown from her rooftop island. All thought of caution, of strategy, of soft contact evaporated from Alistair's mind. His daughter was asking for help. He was going to answer. "That's it," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The waiting is over. Get the car ready, Marcus. We're going in." "Al, wait, let's think about this," Marcus pleaded, stepping in front of him. "This is exactly what we said we wouldn't do. We don't know what's happening in that apartment. Clara could be volatile." "She is 16 years old," Alistair said, his voice trembling with a suppressed fury. "And she has been in a cage for 10 years. Tonight I am breaking open the door. You can either help me, or you can get out of my way." He turned and walked towards the elevator, not waiting for a reply. He didn't care about the risks anymore. He had seen his daughter's face. He had seen her cry for help. The billionaire, the strategist, the patient planner was gone. In his place was only a father, and he was going to get his child. The drive across town was a silent, high-tension affair. Alistair stared out the window, the city lights a meaningless blur. His entire consciousness was focused on the red brick building, on the girl on the roof. Marcus sat beside him, grim-faced, speaking quietly into his phone, coordinating his team. They would form a perimeter, a discreet but impenetrable net. There would be no escape for Clara Bellwether. He had a team of paramedics on standby, as well as a child psychologist, Dr. Aris Thorne, Marcus's estranged brother, and one of the leading experts on trauma and long-term captivity. Alistair had spared no expense, covered every contingency except the one that mattered most: how his daughter would react to him. They parked a block away. Alistair got out of the car, the cool night air feeling electric on his skin. He could see the building at the end of the street. It looked dark, menacing. "The team is in position," Marcus said, coming to his side. "Front and back are covered. No one goes in or out without us knowing." "What's your plan?" "I'm going to knock on the door," Alistair said simply. "Alone?" Marcus asked, incredulous. "This isn't a negotiation, Al. She's unstable." "She's also a pediatric nurse, not a trained operative," Alistair countered. "And I am not going to terrify my daughter by showing up with a team of armed men. I will go to the door. You will be right behind me. We will do this quietly." Marcus sighed, the sound of a man who knew he was fighting a losing battle. "All right, but I'm wired. You'll have an open line to me. You get into trouble. You give the code word, Barnaby, and we're coming through that door, whether you like it or not." Alistair nodded. He started walking, his footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalk. The street smelled of stale garbage and damp concrete. With every step, his heart pounded harder against his ribs. This was it. The culmination of a decade of grief, of searching, of hoping against hope. He reached the building's front entrance. The outer door was unlocked, the lock long broken. He stepped into a dimly lit, narrow hallway that smelled of boiled cabbage and mildew. He checked the apartment numbers on the mailboxes. Bellwether, 4B. The top floor. He started up the stairs, his hand gripping the rickety wooden railing. The building was quiet, the only sounds the creak of the stairs under his feet and the frantic drumming of his own pulse in his ears. He reached the fourth-floor landing. The door to 4B was at the end of the hall. It was painted a sickly green, the paint peeling around the edges. He could hear a television murmuring from within. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. He raised his hand and knocked. The sound was deafening in the silence. The television sound was abruptly cut off. He heard shuffling from inside, then a voice, slurred and suspicious. "Who is it?" It was Clara's voice. "I'm not buying anything." Alistair's mind went blank for a second. What should he say? The truth? A lie? He chose a partial truth. "I'm here about your daughter." There was a long silence from behind the door. Then, the sound of a chain being slid, and a series of locks being turned. The door creaked open a few inches, stopping against a security chain. In the gap, he could see Clara Bellwether's face. Up close, she looked even worse than on the surveillance footage. Her eyes were bloodshot, her skin pale and waxy. Fear and paranoia radiated from her. "What about my daughter?" she hissed, her eyes darting nervously up and down the hallway. "Who are you?" Alistair kept his voice calm, even. "My name is Alistair Covington." The name hung in the air between them. He saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, followed by a wave of pure animal panic. She tried to slam the door shut, but Alistair was ready. He put his foot in the opening, blocking it. "Don't," he said, his voice low and hard. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Clara." "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, pushing against the door with all her might. "Get away from my home." From somewhere deeper in the apartment, he heard another voice. A girl's voice, clear and afraid. "Mama?" "Who is it? What's happening?" It was her voice, Lily's voice. Hearing it, so close, broke through the last of Alistair's restraint. With a surge of adrenaline, he put his shoulder to the door and shoved. The wood around the security chain splintered, and the door flew open, sending Clara stumbling backward into the room. Alistair stepped inside, and his world narrowed to the scene before him. The apartment was small, cluttered, and squalid. Empty bottles and piles of old magazines littered the floor. But he didn't see any of that. He only saw the girl standing in the doorway of a small bedroom. She was clutching the doorframe, her knuckles white. Her wide, terrified eyes, Ilara's eyes, were fixed on him. Her blonde hair fell around her face, and she was even more beautiful and more fragile than she had appeared on the drone's camera. This was his daughter, his Lily. Time seemed to stop. He could only stare at her, his heart a painful, swelling thing in his chest. He took a step forward. "Lily?" he whispered, the name a prayer on his lips. The girl flinched at the name, shaking her head, her eyes darting towards Clara, who was now scrambling to her feet. "My name is Sunny," she said, her voice trembling. "Who are you? What do you want?" "He's no one," Clara shrieked, positioning herself between Alistair and the girl. "He's a crazy man. Sunny, go to your room and lock the door." But Sunny didn't move. She was staring at Alistair, her expression a maelstrom of confusion, fear, and something else. A flicker of dawning recognition, as if she were trying to place a face from a half-forgotten dream. Alistair ignored Clara. He took another slow, deliberate step into the room, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice soft, trying to soothe her as he would a frightened animal. "My name is Alistair, and I believe I am your father." Sunny gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. "No," she whispered, "that's not possible. My parents died in a car crash. Mama told me." She looked at Clara, a desperate plea for confirmation in her eyes. "Tell him, Mama. Tell him he's wrong." Clara's face was a mask of terror. She was trapped, the lies of a decade crumbling around her. "He's lying, baby," she said, her voice cracking. "He's a rich man. He thinks he can just take things. He's confused." Alistair took out his wallet. His fingers trembled as he removed a small, worn photograph. It was the last picture ever taken of Lily. She was 6 years old, sitting on the swing with the yellow ropes, Barnaby the rabbit clutched in her lap. She was smiling, a gappy, joyful, innocent smile. He held it out to her. "This is you," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "The day before you were taken from me. Do you remember? Do you remember the swing?" Sunny stared at the photograph. Her breath hitched. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, until she was close enough to take the picture from his hand. She looked down at the smiling girl, at the one-eyed rabbit, at the familiar yellow ropes. A single tear rolled down her cheek and splashed onto the photo. A memory, fragmented and hazy, surfaced from the deep ocean of her subconscious. A feeling of warmth, the scent of cut grass, a man's deep, rumbling laughter as he pushed her higher and higher. "The swing," she whispered, her eyes wide with a terrifying, world-altering realization. I dream about the swing." She looked up at Alistair, truly looked at him, and in his face she saw the ghost of the laughing man from her dreams. She saw the eyes from the photograph in the secret box. "You," she breathed. "It's you." In that moment, the dam of Alistair's control finally broke. 10 years of grief, of longing, of rage, of despair, all came pouring out in a single, gut-wrenching sob. He closed the distance between them and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into an embrace. She was stiff with shock for a moment, and then, as if a spell had been broken, she collapsed against him, her own sobs shaking her slender frame. He held his daughter in his arms for the first time in a decade, and it felt like finding a part of his own soul that he had thought was lost forever. He was whole again. Behind them, Clara Bellwether sank to the floor, her face in her hands, her wails lost in the sound of a father and daughter reuniting across an impossible chasm of time and sorrow. And just outside the door, Marcus Thorne stood listening, and for the first time in a very, very long time, the cynical ex-cop allowed himself to smile. The minutes that followed were a surreal blur of motion and emotion. Marcus and his team entered the apartment with a quiet professionalism that was both reassuring and jarring. Clara was taken into custody, not with force, but with a quiet resignation. She didn't fight. She seemed to have crumbled into herself, a ghost haunted by her own choices. The paramedics checked on Lily, on Sunny, who clung to Alistair as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had turned to water. She had no physical injuries, but the invisible wounds were deep and terrifyingly unknown. Dr. Eris Thorne, Marcus's brother, arrived. He was a kind-faced man with gentle eyes and a calming presence. He didn't rush, didn't push. He simply introduced himself and made it clear he was there to help, whenever she was ready. Through it all, Alistair never let her go. They sat on the sagging couch, amidst the squalor of the apartment that had been her prison, and he just held her. He murmured her name, Lily, over and over as if to convince himself it was real. He could feel the fine bones of her shoulders, the fragility of her. He had missed everything, Her first day of middle school, her first crush, her 16th birthday. The stolen years were a physical pain, a debt he could never repay. But she was here. She was alive. That was the only thought that mattered. He looked around the small, dim room that had been her world. The walls were covered in her drawings, sketches of birds, of clouds, of distant stars. They were beautiful, filled with a longing and a talent that had somehow survived, even flourished, in this suffocating environment. His artist, his Ilara's daughter. "Where is she?" Lily asked suddenly, her voice muffled against his chest. It was the first thing she had said in what felt like an eternity. "Who?" Alistair asked gently. "Pippa, the little girl. Is she okay?" Alistair's heart swelled. Even now, in the midst of her own cataclysmic trauma, her first thought was for the child who had saved her. "She's safe," he said, stroking her hair. "She's with me. She's the one who told me where to find you. She's a very brave little girl." Lily pulled back slightly, looking at him, her tear-filled eyes searching his. "Clara, she's not. She wasn't always." She couldn't finish the sentence, a decade of complex, twisted emotions choking her. This was the woman who had stolen her life, but who had also fed her, clothed her, and been the only mother she had ever known. "I know," Alistair said, understanding the impossible conflict in her heart. "We will figure all of that out, I promise. You don't have to worry about anything anymore. I'm here now. I'll take care of you." Getting her out of the building was a carefully orchestrated maneuver. Marcus's team had cleared the way. A black SUV was waiting, its engine humming. Alistair wrapped a blanket around Lily's shoulders and guided her out of the apartment, shielding her from the curious eyes of neighbors who had peeked into the hallway. The moment they stepped out and into the cool night air, Lily stopped and looked up at the sky. She took a deep, shuddering breath, as if she were breathing freely for the first time in her life. Alistair watched her, his heart aching. She had only ever seen the stars from a dirty rooftop. He was going to show her the world. The journey back to the penthouse was the reverse of the one he had taken with Pippa, but it felt 1,000 times more significant. He was bringing his daughter home. When the elevator doors opened into his vast, silent apartment, Lily's eyes widened. She walked slowly into the room, touching the smooth back of a sofa, running her fingers along a cool marble countertop. She was a stranger in her own father's house. Pippa came running out from the hallway, her face alight with worry and hope. She stopped when she saw Lily, her eyes wide. "Sonny," she whispered. Lily knelt down and opened her arms. Pippa ran into her embrace, hugging her tightly. "I told him," Pippa said, her voice filled with a child's simple pride. "I knew he'd come for you." "You did," Lily said, her voice thick with tears as she hugged the little girl. "You saved me, Pippa." Alistair watched them, this unlikely pair who had found solace in each other in the darkness of that apartment. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that his life would never be the same. He had a family, a strange, broken, and beautiful family, forged in trauma and brought together by a child's act of courage. The days that followed were a delicate dance of healing and discovery. Lily was quiet, tentative. She moved through the penthouse like a phantom, often just sitting by the window watching the city below. Dr. Thorne came every day, not for formal therapy sessions, but just to talk with her, to build a foundation of trust. Alistair learned to be patient, a skill he had never possessed. He didn't push her to talk about the past. Instead, he focused on the present. He learned she liked cinnamon in her oatmeal. He learned she was a brilliant artist, with a portfolio of sketches that showed a prodigious talent. He bought her every art supply she could ever want, and watched, his heart full, as she filled the silent apartment with color and life. The story, when it finally came out in small pieces, was both simpler and more tragic than he could have imagined. Clara Bellwether had not been part of a grand kidnapping conspiracy. She was a woman hollowed out by her own infertility and grief. She had been at the hospital when Lily was born and had become obsessed with the beautiful, healthy baby. Years later, deep in her addiction and mental illness, she had acted on a delusional impulse. She hadn't asked for a ransom because it had never been about money. In her twisted mind, she was rescuing Lily from a world of wealth and privilege she believed was cold and unloving. She had raised Lily in a strange bubble of neglect and affection, telling her that her parents had died and that she was her only family. The secrets, the rattle, the shoe, the photograph, were kept not as trophies, but as relics of a life she had stolen, but also, in her own way, revered. The name Sunny had been her invention, a name for the little girl who was the only light in her dark life. For Lily, the process of untangling her identity was immense. She was Sunny, but she was also Lily. She had memories, feelings, even a strange protective love for the woman who had imprisoned her. Alistair understood that healing would not be a straight line. It would be a messy, complicated journey, but it was a journey they would take together. Pippa was the bridge between them. She was the one who could coax a smile from Lily when she was withdrawn. She was the one who would crawl onto the couch and rest her head on Lily's lap. A simple, trusting gesture that spoke volumes. She brought an uncomplicated joy into their fragile, new world. One evening, about a week after her return, Alistair found Lily in the library looking at a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was of Alara, her smile radiant. "She's beautiful," Lily said softly. "Your mother," Alistair said, his voice thick. "You have her eyes. And her heart." He came and stood beside her. "She never gave up hope, you know, even at the end. She believed you were out there somewhere. She would be so incandescently happy to see you here, home." Lily leaned her head against his shoulder. "Tell me about her," she whispered. And so he did. He sat with his daughter late into the night, telling her stories of the mother she had never known, of their love, of the life they had dreamed of for her. He was giving her back her past, one memory at a time. A few weeks later, Marcus came to the penthouse with an update. Clara Bellwether had taken a plea bargain, in exchange for her full cooperation, and given her clear mental instability. She would serve her time in a psychiatric facility, not a prison. Alistair felt no triumph, only a profound sadness for the wasted, broken lives. Lily's healing was the only justice that mattered. The future was still uncertain. There would be legal battles, not just for Clara, but for Pippa, whose mother had effectively abandoned her. Alistair had already set his lawyers on the task of securing him full guardianship of Pippa. He would not let her fall through the cracks of the system. He was her family now, just as she and Lily were his. One sunny afternoon, Alistair took the two girls down to the garden behind his old townhouse, a property he had kept but never visited, unable to face the memories. It was the place where Lily had been taken. The garden was overgrown, but the old oak tree still stood, and hanging from a thick branch were the tattered, faded remains of a pair of yellow ropes. Lily walked over to the swing and gently touched the ropes. She didn't look sad. She looked peaceful. Pippa ran over and looked up at the swing with hopeful eyes. "Can you push me?" she asked Alistair. Alistair looked at Lily, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. He lifted Pippa onto the swing and began to push her, gently at first, then higher and higher. Pippa's laughter, bright and clear, filled the garden, chasing away the ghosts of the past. Lily sat on the grass, her sketchbook open, and began to draw. She wasn't drawing the sad, lonely things she had drawn on the rooftop. She was drawing a little girl on a swing, laughing, her hair flying in the wind. She was drawing a man, her father, a real smile finally reaching his eyes. She was drawing a picture of her new, improbable, wonderful life. Alistair watched them, his two daughters, and felt a sense of peace settle over him for the first time in a decade. The gaping wound in his life was still there, a scar that would never fully fade. But it was no longer a source of emptiness. It was a testament to his survival, a reminder of the love that had endured. He hadn't just found the daughter he had lost. He had found a reason to live again, a future he never thought he would have. And in the warm afternoon sun, surrounded by the laughter of children, the billionaire who had once owned the world finally felt like he had everything. This new beginning was fragile, built on a foundation of shared trauma and uncertain futures. But it was also resilient, held together by the fierce, protective love of a father for his daughters and the simple, unbreakable bond they had already forged. As he pushed Pippa on the swing, her joyful squeals a melody of hope, he knew their story was far from over. It was just beginning. The legal process of adopting Pippa was, as his lawyers had warned, a complex affair. Her mother, located in a rehab facility, willingly signed away her parental rights, a final act of surrender that was both a blessing and a tragedy. The courts, however, moved with a bureaucratic slowness that grated on Alistair's nerves. He was a man accustomed to immediate results, and the world of family court, with its endless paperwork and procedural delays, was a foreign and frustrating landscape. During this period of legal limbo, their small, unconventional family began to find its rhythm. The vast penthouse, once a symbol of loneliness, was now filled with the sounds of life. Music played, sometimes the classical pieces Ilara had loved, sometimes the pop music Lily was discovering with all the enthusiasm of a teenager who had been cut off from the world. There were arguments over what to watch on TV, laughter from the kitchen as they attempted to bake cookies and ended up covered in flour, and the soft scratch of Lily's charcoal pencils as she drew for hours on end. Lily was slowly, cautiously, stepping into her new life. Alistair enrolled her in private tutoring, and it quickly became apparent that Clara, for all her failings, had not neglected her education. The girl was brilliant, absorbing information with a voracious appetite. But there were gaps, huge, gaping holes in her social development. She didn't know the simple rituals of teenage life. She had never been to a movie theater, never ordered a pizza with friends, never been to a school dance. Alistair made it his mission to fill these gaps, not with grand, extravagant gestures, but with small, normal experiences. He took them to the movies, buying the largest popcorn he could find. He let them have a sleepover in the living room, complete with sleeping bags and scary stories, though it was just the two of them. Each new experience was a small victory, a single brick being laid in the foundation of her new life. Pippa was the glue that held them together. Her boundless optimism and innocent worldview were a constant source of light. She adored Lily with a fierce loyalty, and she saw Alistair not as a billionaire, but as the man who gave the best piggyback rides and who always remembered to cut the crusts off her sandwiches. She was healing them, in her own small way, just by being herself. One afternoon, Alistair walked into the living room to find Lily staring intently at a business news channel. His face was on the screen, a stern-looking photo next to a headline about a major acquisition by Covington Industries. "They make you sound," she trailed off, searching for the word. "Intimidating," he finished for her, a wry smile on his face. "That's part of the job description, I'm afraid." She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "Is that who you are?" He sat down beside her on the sofa. "It's who I had to be," he said honestly. "After you were gone. Work was the only thing that made sense. It was a problem I could solve. A world I could control. I built an armor around myself, Lily, and I think I forgot how to take it off." "You're taking it off now," she said softly, resting her head on his shoulder. It was in these quiet moments that he felt the deepest connection to her, the confirmation that the bond between them, though stretched and damaged, had never truly broken. He was not just her rescuer. He was her father. He was learning how to be a parent again, and she was learning how to be a daughter. The day of the final court hearing for Pippa's adoption arrived. Alistair sat in the sterile courtroom, Lily on one side of him, Pippa on the other. Pippa was wearing a new dress and her hair was tied with a ribbon. She seemed to understand the gravity of the day, and she sat quietly, her small hand clutching his. When the judge, a kind-faced woman with weary eyes, finally stamped the papers and declared the adoption official, Alistair felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled him. He was now, legally and forever, the father of 2 daughters. They walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight. Pippa looked up at him, her blue eyes shining. "Does this mean I get to call you Daddy now?" she asked. Alistair's heart constricted. He knelt down in front of her on the courthouse steps. "You can call me whatever you want," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I would like that very much." She threw her arms around his neck, and he hugged her tightly, burying his face in her hair. Lily stood watching them, a gentle, happy smile on her face. They were a family. Officially. To celebrate, he didn't take them to a fancy restaurant or on an exotic trip. He took them to a public park, the one where he and Ilara used to take Lily. It was filled with the noise and chaos of ordinary families enjoying a sunny afternoon. They bought ice cream from a truck, and Pippa, inevitably, got chocolate all over her face. Lily, for the first time since her return, laughed a full, uninhibited laugh. The sound was the most beautiful music Alistair had ever heard. Later, as the sun began to set, they found themselves by a small duck pond. Alistair bought a bag of breadcrumbs, and the 3 of them sat on a bench tossing pieces to the eager ducks. "I've been thinking," Lily said, her gaze fixed on the water, "about what I want to do." "Anything," Alistair said immediately. "Whatever you want, I'll make it happen. The best art schools in the world are at your disposal." She shook her head. "It's not just about art, it's bigger than that." She turned to him, her eyes shining with a newfound purpose. "All those years I felt so alone. I thought I was the only person in the world who felt like a ghost. But there are other kids out there. Kids who are lost or hurt or in situations like mine or Pippa's. The Covington Foundation. It helps people, right?" "Yes," he said, unsure where she was going. "I want to help," she said, her voice firm. "I don't want to just be the girl who was found. I want to use my story. I want to create a new part of the foundation. A part for the lost children. We could use art therapy and counseling, and we could fund investigations to find kids who are still missing. We could call it the Lily Project." Alistair stared at his daughter, his 16-year-old daughter who had endured the unthinkable, and saw not a victim, but a warrior. She had taken the darkest part of her life and was trying to turn it into a beacon of hope for others. In her, he saw the strength of her mother and a resilience that was all her own. "The Lily Project," he repeated, testing the words. He looked from Lily's determined face to Pippa's innocent one. "I think that is the best idea I have ever heard." A new chapter of their lives had begun. It wouldn't be without its challenges. There would be therapy and nightmares and moments of sadness for the years that were stolen. But there would also be laughter and healing and the quiet joy of a family reborn. Alistair Covington had spent a decade building an empire of glass and steel, a monument to his grief. Now he would dedicate the rest of his life to building a different kind of legacy, one of hope and healing, alongside his 2 extraordinary daughters. As they sat on the park bench, the last rays of the setting sun casting a golden glow around them, Alistair felt a profound sense of gratitude. The little girl who had walked into his gala and whispered an impossible truth had not just given him back the daughter he had lost. She had given him back himself. He was no longer a ghost haunting a life that had ended. He was a father, a protector, a man with a purpose. He was home.